Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel for a brand new mystery with Molly. If you are new around here, if you have never seen my face on your screen before, then hi, my name is Molly and I post true crime videos like this every single week. So if you think that is something that you might want to stick around for, then please do subscribe. And whilst you're at it, don't forget to switch on the little notification bell so that YouTube will let you know whenever I post a new video. But anyway, this week we are going to be talking about a big case, a case that has been requested to me so many times in the comments of my videos and also by my Patreon members. I've had this one requested by a few Patreon members before, although to be honest I've had this case on my list to cover ever since I started doing these videos anyway, because I vividly remember this case happening. It happened when I was around 10-11 years old, and if you are also from the UK and you are probably around my age and older, I'm sure you will remember it too, because it was huge news, national news at the time. It was all over the newspapers, all over the TV. This case was everywhere. Today we are talking about one of the biggest manhunts in British history, the hunt for Raoul Moat, after he murdered an innocent man and fatally injured 2 more people. Following these attacks, Raoul Moat went on the run and he managed to escape police detection for several days until eventually they found him. And an investigation that had the whole nation completely shocked and glued to their TV screens for an entire week came to an end. So let's start at the beginning. Raoul Thomas Moat was a 37-year-old man who was born on the 17th of June 1973 in Gateshead, which is a large town in the northeast area of England. Raoul was one of 2 siblings. He had a half-brother called Angus, and the 2 boys were raised mainly by their grandmother. And this was because Raoul's mother, her name was Josephine, she had some issues with her mental health that meant that she just wasn't well enough to care for the children herself. However, she did live locally, so she still saw the boys occasionally and had contact with them. According to one source I read, Raoul Moat's biological father was a man named Peter. However, Raoul never actually knew this himself. He never knew his real dad because his mother never told him the identity of his father, and I think Raoul always resented his mother for this. He desperately wanted to know who his dad was. He was desperate to have that father figure in his life. That was all he wanted in his childhood, really. He had quite a difficult upbringing from the looks of it, and all he ever wanted was a normal family, which included his father, but he never got that. There isn't too much more information online about Raoul's younger years, unfortunately, so I don't know if there were any early warning signs that could indicate what he would go on to do later in his life. I did read on one source that in his childhood years he used to torture animals and commit arson, but I can't be totally sure that that is true because, as I said, it was only on one source, so take that bit of information with a pinch of salt. But I do know that in 1986, when Raoul was around 13 years old, his mother Josephine got married to a man who then obviously became Raoul's stepfather. And Raoul did not have a good relationship with his mother's new partner at all. He did not like him one bit, and the stepdad in turn did not like Raoul. And I don't know if there was any particular reason for this either. I don't know if anything happened, if maybe there was some abuse going on, but yeah, they just did not like each other and they did not get on. And on top of that, Raoul did not have the best relationship with his mother either. I don't think they ever really had a good relationship, to be honest, but after his stepdad came along, it just got even worse, and his mother didn't really care for Raoul very much, or at least that's how Raoul felt about their relationship. He didn't really feel like his mother cared about him. And later in his life, when he was around 24, he actually just cut his family off. He stopped speaking to them because he didn't want anything to do with them anymore. But we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves there. So when Raoul Raoul was 16 years old, he left education, he left school, and he started developing an interest in like weightlifting and bodybuilding. You see, Raoul always wanted to be known as this big, strong, muscle man, I guess, which he was. By the time he was a fully grown adult, he was 6'3", he was very large and very muscular, and this physique that he had developed after he started using steroids to build up his muscle. And a lot of people that were close to Raoul said that when he started using these steroids, they didn't just change his physical appearance, but also just him, his temperament. Raoul Moat was known for having a pretty bad temper anyway, but when he started his steroid use, it just got so much worse. He was very, very quick to anger, and it did not take much for him to just lose it and snap and fly off the handle. Raoul had a couple of jobs over the years. He worked as a tree surgeon. In fact, I believe he set up his own tree surgeon business at one point, or he set up some kind of business. He did some work as a panel beater where he helped to repair damaged vehicle bodies, and he also worked as a doorman or a bouncer outside of nightclubs in Newcastle. And it was whilst he was working that job that he met a girl who would eventually become his girlfriend, Samantha Stubber. They met in 2004 when Raoul would have been around 31 years old, and Samantha at this point was only 16 years old, so she was still a child. But they met one night when Samantha used a fake ID to get into a nightclub that Moat was working at, and their relationship just developed from there. They started dating, they fell in love, and eventually they had a child together, a little baby girl. And this wasn't Raoul Moat's first child. He already had 2 children from a previous relationship, so in total he had 3 children. Although, side note, I have read on a few articles online that it is rumoured that he had even more children, as many as 6 in total, to a couple of different women. But again, take that with a pinch of salt, because I don't know if that is correct, because I only read it on a couple of articles. But as I said, what we do know for definite is that he had 3 children, the third one with Samantha Stobbart. Samantha and Raoul were together for a number of years, but their relationship was not a very good one at all, because Raoul could be very, very abusive towards his girlfriend, physically abusive, but also just emotionally and mentally abusive too. He was very dominant, very controlling. He saw Samantha as his property. Samantha could not do anything without her boyfriend's approval. He decided what they did and where they went. He decided what they spent their money on. She was not allowed to buy anything without him saying that she was allowed to buy it first. Even just who she spoke to, she couldn't speak to anyone on the phone without him knowing about it. And as I said earlier, Moat was very, very quick to anger. So if Samantha ever did anything wrong, he would kick off and become violent, and he would always blame Sam for the abuse. If he hit her or he beat her, he would basically say that it was her fault because she provoked him, and if she didn't provoke him, he wouldn't need to get violent. And it wasn't just Sam that he was like this with. His previous partners also said that they suffered horrendous abuse at the hands of Raoul Moat. He was abusive towards all of his girlfriends, and because of all of this domestic violence, Sam and Raoul's relationship was very much on again, off again. They were constantly splitting up and getting back together because Raoul would do something really awful like hit her, and then following this she would leave and go and stay with her parents. But then Raoul would somehow manage to persuade Sam to come back to him. He probably promised her that he would change and not do it again, and she believed him, so she went back every single time, and every single time he would just do it again. It was just this vicious cycle of abuse that Sam was trapped in, and eventually it got to the point where she was desperate to escape, desperate to leave Raoul, but she never felt like she could because he was a very violent man. And if she did leave him for good, God knows what he would do to her. However, in March of 2010, about 6 years after they first got together, Sam saw her chance to escape when her boyfriend was sent to prison. Raoul had been in trouble with the police a couple of times over the years. One time in 2005, he was arrested after he was caught carrying around a knuckle duster and a samurai sword. He was also known to the police because of his domestic violence. I believe his previous partners reported him to the police for the abuse that they suffered whilst they were with him. And according to one documentary I watched, he also worked for a crime family in Newcastle for several years. So he had been arrested a number of times in his adult life, but the only time he was ever convicted of an offence and actually sent to prison was in 2010, when he was convicted of the assault of one of his relatives. And this relative just happened to be one of his young daughters. Apparently he hit his daughter, and so he was arrested and convicted of the assault, and he was ordered to serve 16 weeks in Durham prison. And like I mentioned before, now that he had gone to prison, 22-year-old Samantha saw this as her chance to escape Raoul Moat once and for all. They had already separated by the time he went to prison, and they had been separated for quite a while, but again, I think this separation was very on and off. But then when Moat went to prison, Sam decided that that was it. She did not want to be with this man anymore, and so she officially broke things off with him. She did keep in touch with him whilst he was in prison because obviously they still had a child together, but she knew that she never wanted to be with him again. And it was not long after she broke things off with Raoul that Samantha met and started dating another man named Christopher Brown. Christopher Brown was a 29-year-old man originally from the south of England. His father was a man named Jeff, I believe, and his mother was called Sally. And Christopher also had a sister and a half-brother. Christopher was described by his mother Sally as being a very happy-go-lucky young man who was always laughing. He was very caring and considerate. He was always happy to help others if they needed his help because he was just such a nice and kind person. He had a lot of friends. He was a very good brother, and he was just a normal guy, really, a normal young man. His family said that he was a typical lad. In October of 2009, Christopher moved from the south of England to Newcastle, and originally he was only meant to be going to Newcastle for like a weekend, just a couple of days to visit one of his friends who lived there. But then once he got there and he had spent a few days there, he decided that he actually wanted to stay in Newcastle for a while. He wanted to live up there because, you see, Christopher wanted to be a karate instructor. It's what he loved to do. And he was able to find work in Newcastle as a karate instructor, so he decided to settle down there. And it was obviously whilst he was in Newcastle that he met Samantha Stubber, and they began dating when her ex-boyfriend Raoul Moat was in prison. And when Raoul found out about Samantha's new boyfriend, he was angry, so angry, because Raoul saw Samantha as his possession. In his eyes, she belonged to him, so the fact that she had moved on to someone else made him so furious. However, what made Raoul Moat even more angry about this whole thing was that Samantha told him that Christopher Brown was a police officer. Now, this wasn't true. As I've literally just said, Christopher was a karate instructor. He wasn't a police officer. He had never been a police officer, and he had no interest in joining the police force. But it's believed that Sam lied about this, about her new boyfriend being a policeman, because of how scared she was of Raoul. She knew that he would not be in prison for long, and that when he was eventually released, he would probably try to get some kind of revenge on Samantha for leaving him. But if Samantha told him that her new boyfriend Christopher was a policeman, then maybe that might make Raoul think twice about coming back for her. He might get scared and back off. And she also told Raoul that Christopher was a karate instructor too, because obviously karate instructors are very good at self-defense and stuff. So I assume that she thought that, again, this might make Raoul leave her alone. However, little did Samantha know that this lie actually did the complete opposite. It just made Raoul Moat even more angry because he hated the police. He honestly hated them so much because he felt that the Northumbria police had a vendetta against him. As I said previously, Moat had been in trouble with the police a number of times before. He had been arrested several times, and it got to the point where he had so many run-ins with them that he just felt like they were picking on him, essentially. He felt like he was being harassed by them. He blamed the police for a lot of things that had gone wrong in his life, and he was very paranoid because he always felt like they were watching him. He thought that they were listening to his phone calls, and he thought that they had put cameras outside of his home. He just honestly hated them so much, and when he found out that his ex-girlfriend's new boyfriend was a policeman, his hatred for the entire police force just grew and intensified, and he decided that he was going to get revenge on the police and his ex-girlfriend, and to do this he was going to kill Christopher Brown. Whilst he was still in prison, Raoul Moat got in contact with one of his friends named Carl Ness, who also had a lengthy criminal history and who would go on to play a huge part in this whole case. And Raoul asked his friend Carl to do two things for him. Number one, keep an eye on Samantha. He said to Carl, you need to follow her wherever she goes. See who goes into her house, see whose car she goes in, see what places she goes with her new boyfriend. Just watch her constantly. And the second thing he asked of Carl Ness was to get a particular individual to visit him in prison so that he could get access to a, in his words, quote, car with 6 wheels. And what he really meant by that was a gun with 6 cartridges. This particular individual was someone that had connections to things like that. He was able to obtain guns, and he was able to get one for Raoul Moat. Just as a side note, I don't actually know if the police ever found this guy, the one that provided Raoul with the gun. If they did, then I'm guessing his name has just never been released to the public because I couldn't find it anywhere in my research. But anyway, Raoul Moat was released from prison on the 1st of July 2010, and just the day after he was released, the staff at Durham prison actually got in contact with the Northumbrian police, and they told them that they had overheard Raoul Moat making threats towards his ex-girlfriend Samantha Stubber. So the prison was effectively warning the police. However, it seems as though the police didn't act upon this warning because they didn't prevent him from doing what he did just a couple of days later. As soon as Raoul was let out of prison, he and his friend Carl Ness began trying to track down their target, Christopher Brown. They started phoning different gyms and sports centres and karate clubs in the local area to try and figure out which one Christopher worked at as a karate instructor. They were trying to find out what kind of car he drove. They were really trying their best to pin down Christopher Brown, work out where he was and what he did every second of every day. It was all very carefully planned. On the 2nd of July, Raoul Moat and Carl Ness went to a B&Q store in Newcastle, which is like a big DIY shop that we have here in the UK. And they purchased various things that one would need if they were planning to go on the run. For example, camping supplies like a tent. And then later that same evening, they set their plan in motion and they went to find Samantha and Christopher in a white transit van, which I believe Carl Ness had actually stolen. And eventually they tracked the couple down. They were at a friend's house in Burtley, which is about 7 miles south of Newcastle in Gateshead. Sam and Christopher had been at a pub earlier on that evening with Sam's mother to celebrate her birthday, her mother's birthday. And then later on that evening, is when they went to a house party at her parents' neighbour's house in Bertley to carry on with the celebrations there. And in the early hours of the morning on the 3rd of July, Carl Ness and Raoul Moat arrived at that house in Bertley. Carl dropped Raoul off there. He got out of the van, he grabbed his sawn-off shotgun, and he began walking towards the house. But Raoul didn't attack straight away. He actually crept up to the house and he sat and hid outside one of the windows where he could see all of the party guests inside, including Christopher and Samantha, and he stayed there outside of the window for over an hour. He could hear everything that all of the guests inside were saying because it was a summer evening and the windows were open, and he could hear Chris and Samantha talking and laughing about him, or he believed they were talking about him. We don't know if they were for sure, but Raoul believed they were anyway, and he was furious, and he texted Carl Ness, quote, "They are all in this house and I'm in the garden, slagging me off nice and proper. My suffering is so funny apparently. I'm gonna kick off nice and proper when they come out, then we'll see who's laughing." A short while after Moat sent these texts, at around 2:40 a.m, Samantha and Christopher decided to leave the party and go home, and so they said goodbye to their friends and they walked out of the front door. And finally, the moment Raoul Moat had been waiting for was here, and as soon as he saw the couple, he confronted them. He walked towards them, raised his shotgun, and immediately fired it at 29-year-old Christopher Brown, and it hit him. But despite receiving a gunshot wound, Christopher actually tried to run away from Moat. He was still able to run. However, he didn't get very far before Moat fired at him a second time, and after this second shot, Christopher fell to the ground. But that wasn't enough for Raoul Moat. He wanted to make sure that Christopher would die that night, and so he walked up to him whilst he was on the ground bleeding out, and he shot him again, and this third shot ended Christopher Brown's life. And as soon as he had finished with his attack on Christopher, Moat turned his attention to his ex-girlfriend Samantha Stubber. Now by this point she had ran back inside the house and she was hysterical. Obviously she had just witnessed her ex-boyfriend shooting her new boyfriend, so she was screaming, but she ran back inside the house and she tried to hide while someone else in the house called 999. However, Raoul could see through the window that Samantha was in the lounge, and so he raised his gun and he fired a shot through the window and it hit Sam in the abdomen. He didn't shoot Samantha as many times as Christopher, he just shot her once, but she was still critically injured and she could have died, but thankfully after she was taken to the hospital, Samantha survived the attack. But sadly, as I said, the same could not be said for Christopher Brown. He was clearly Moat's main target that night. He was the one that he wanted to make sure was dead before he left, and unfortunately there was nothing anyone could do. Christopher would have been dead before any paramedics even arrived at the scene. Raoul Moat had murdered him. After Moat shot Samantha through the window, he fled the scene and went on the run with Carl Ness. The police were immediately called and a murder investigation was quickly launched, and the police of course knew instantly who they were looking for. When they got to the scene, straight away the other guests were telling them who was responsible, so they knew that they were on the hunt for Raoul Moat, who had now become Britain's most wanted man. Raoul Moat's face was quickly all over the news because obviously the police had to find him. He was a very dangerous man and he was still armed with a gun, so they needed the public to look out for him so that hopefully they would find him faster. And less than 24 hours after the murder of Christopher and the attempted murder of Samantha, the police had a lead when they received contact from Raoul Moat himself. In the early hours of the morning on the 4th of July 2010, Moat called 999 and he confessed to the shooting, and he also made a chilling threat to the police. Now, unfortunately, I don't think I'll be able to play the phone calls in this video for copyright reasons. If I can play a small chunk of it, I will. So I'm just going to tell you what he said in the phone call, but I'm not going to go through all of it because it was quite long. It was about 4 minutes long, and a lot of it was just Raoul talking about all of the ways that he felt the police had wronged him. But if you would like to listen to the full phone call yourself, then I will leave it linked in the description box, and I will leave the transcript linked in the description box too. I'm just going to read the beginning of the call and the end of the call. So he rang 999, and when an operator picked up, he said, "Hello there, this is the gunman from Berkeley last night. My name is Raoul Moat. What I'm phoning about is to tell you exactly why I've done what I've done, right? Now, my girlfriend has been having an affair behind my back with one of your officers, this gentleman that I shot last night, the karate instructor. Right now, you bastards have been onto me, right, for years. You've hassled us, harassed us, you won't leave us alone." And then towards the end of the call, he said, quote, "You wanted me to do myself in, and I was going to do it until I found out about him properly and what was going on. And as soon as I found out he was one of your officers, I thought, nah, you've had too much from me. You'll get your chance to kill us, right? You'll get your chance to kill us." And then the operator said, "Right, we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that." And then Moat responded saying, quote, "You're wanting me to kill myself, but I'm going to give you a chance because I'm hunting for officers right now." The operator then said, "No, please don't do that. We don't want any more killings, all right?" However, Moat did not respond to this, and he just hung up the phone.
"This is the gunman from Berkeley last night. My name is Raoul Moat. Now, my girlfriend, she's had an affair with one of your officers. Was he not a police officer, I wouldn't have shot him. You police have took too much off me over the years. Now you think you can take your missus. But the fact of the matter is, I'm not coming in a lie. I'm coming to get you. I'm not on the run. I am coming to get you."
So he had just made a direct threat to all police officers. He had basically declared war on the Northumbrian police force. He said that he was literally hunting for police officers because, again, as we discussed earlier, he believed that the police were the reason his life had gotten to this point. Everything was the police's fault in his eyes, and he wanted to take revenge on them. He believed that he had already killed one police officer, Christopher Brown, and now he was looking for more. And just a couple of minutes after that phone call, he found one. Earlier that evening, a traffic police officer named PC David Rathband had started his late shift. David was a 42-year-old father of two, and he had been a police officer for many, many years, and he loved it. He was so passionate about his work. People close to him literally said that the police force was David's calling. He really enjoyed what he did, and he was a very proactive police officer. In fact, he had one of the best records in the whole Northumbria police force. David was one of three siblings. He had a twin brother named Darren, and he had an older sister named Debbie. However, Debbie said that although she was David's older sister, it was more like the other way around. She was older than David, but she always thought of him as her big brother because he was just such a caring family man, and he was like Debbie's protector. He really looked after her and the rest of his family. He was like their rock, which is probably why he was such a good policeman, because he really cared about people and he wanted to protect people. As I said previously, on the evening of the 3rd of July 2010, PC David Rathband had started his late shift as a traffic police officer. And of course, by this point, every single police officer knew the situation with Raoul Moat. They knew that he had a gun and that he was on the loose, so they knew to look out for him. And PC David Rathband actually already knew Raoul Moat. He had encountered him before. Basically, in March of 2009, so just over a year before this whole case took place, David stopped Raoul Moat's vehicle as it was about to pull into a scrapyard. Now, I don't know the exact reason why David pulled Moat over that day, and I don't know if anything ever came of it. Like, I don't know if Moat was arrested that day for something, but David pulled him over anyway, and he started speaking to Moat, and Moat quickly got very angry and he started shouting and ranting at David Rathband about a couple of things, about the police, about social services. It just got very heated between them because Moat just kept getting angrier and angrier, and when their encounter had ended, David actually said to people that he believed Moat would come again. They hadn't heard the last of Raoul Moat. And David was right, because whilst he was working in the early hours of the morning on the 4th of July, he encountered Moat again. But this time, Moat was a wanted man for the shooting in Bertley. That night, David was on duty and he was sitting in his police car, which was parked on a roundabout by the junction on the A1 and A69 roads, which is near East Denton in Newcastle. At around 12:45 a.m, just 12 minutes after Moat made that phone call to 999, David Rathband was spotted by Raoul Moat as he was driving around with Carl Ness, and also another accomplice. Another man had joined them by this point, and he was also helping Raoul Moat. His name was Khurram Arwan, and he was 23 years old, and now the group were driving around in Khurram's black Lexus car. Moat and Ness had ditched the white transit van by this time, probably because they were worried that the police knew that's what they were driving in and they would be easily traced. So they decided to ditch it and travel in Khurram's vehicle instead to escape detection. So the three men were driving around in Khurram's black Lexus car, trying to find a police officer for Raoul to attack, and eventually they found one. They found PC David Rathband. So Raoul got out of the car armed with his shotgun and he crept towards David's police car from behind, and David could sense that someone was near him, near his car. He just had a feeling that someone was behind him, and so he turned around, and as he did, he saw Raoul Moat tapping at his car window, and as soon as they clocked each other, Moat raised his shotgun and he fired it through the window towards David, and this bullet hit David right in the face. As soon as David was shot, he immediately tried to activate the emergency button in his parole car, but Moat saw him doing this, and so he decided to shoot him a second time. And after the second bullet, Moat walked back to the car and his accomplices drove him away from the scene, and Moat left probably thinking that he had killed PC David Rathband. However, he hadn't. PC Rathband was severely injured. He had literally been shot in the face, but he was still alive when Moat left the scene, and he actually managed to grab his police radio and use it to tell other officers that he had been shot.
Is it Tango 190? I'll reach you. Yes, sir.
So David was taken straight to the hospital and he was in very critical condition. Like I said, he had been shot twice, once in his face and once in the upper part of his body, in his chest area. So his injuries were very severe. They were life-threatening. However, he was treated in the hospital, and thankfully, by some miracle, David survived the attack, although he was left completely blind. As soon as he was shot in the face, he was blinded, and he would be blind for the rest of his life. Less than an hour after Raoul Moat shot David Rathband, he called the police again, and again he confessed to the shooting and he threatened the police force once more. He said, quote, "I just downed your officer at the roundabout in the West End of Newcastle. I'm absolutely not going to stop. You're going to have to kill me. I'm never going to stop." And he also told the operator on this second phone call that he had 2 hostages with him, and when the police found this out, they were very concerned, more so than they already were. They knew that if they didn't apprehend Moat soon, there was a chance that these 2 hostages would lose their lives too. But it turns out that these 2 hostages that Moat was referring to were Carl Ness and Khurram Arwan, who, as we know, were not hostages at all. They were Moat's friends and accomplices. They were helping him on his shooting spree, and the police soon realised this. this. In fact, whilst the whole manhunt was going on, Khurram Awan actually wrote a letter to his sister in which he just basically said that he was absolutely fine. He told her that he was not a hostage, Raoul Moat was his friend, and that he was, as he put it, safer than safe. He also told his sister to burn the letter after he read it because obviously he didn't want it getting back to the police somehow. And I believe Carl Ness wrote a similar letter to his family too, just saying that he wasn't being held captive and that he was helping Moat. But anyway, Moat told the police that Carl Ness and Khurram Awan were his hostages, but that of course was a lie. And I imagine he just said that they were hostages because he didn't feel like the police were taking him seriously. And he even said that to them. He said that they were not taking him seriously. So if he told them that he was holding people captive, hopefully they would. But the police were taking this seriously, obviously. I mean, he had killed one person and severely injured two others. They knew the severity of this situation. And so following this, the police actually made a TV appeal in which they spoke directly to Raoul Moat himself. The police did quite a few TV appeals and press conferences during the manhunt for Moat, and in them they were pleading with Moat to just stop, just give himself up. And on Monday the 5th of July, so this was day 3 of the manhunt and the day after PC David Rathband was shot, the police held another TV appeal during which they read out sections of a 49-page letter that they had received from Raoul Moat himself. Now, Raoul gave this letter to a friend of his and he told his friend to give it to the police and press. And I'm going to read a couple of quotes from the letter now. Obviously, I'm not going to read the whole letter because it is 49 pages long, and I don't even think the entire letter is public anyway. I couldn't find it anywhere online. But in the letter, he basically just blames the police again for everything that had happened. He talked about the shooting of Christopher Brown and David Rathband. He also says at one point in the letter that he only shot his ex-girlfriend Samantha to remind her never to do what she did to him again, and also to get her some compensation money. He said that he only shot her once so that she would have a, quote, small injury and she would be able to claim compensation. He also said in the letter, quote, "Last night I called 999 and declared war on Northumbria Police before shooting an officer on the West End A69 roundabout. Rang again and told them they're going to pay for what they've done to me and Sam. I went straight, but they couldn't let it go. The public need not fear me, but the police should, as I won't stop till I'm dead." So once again, Raoul Moat had made a direct threat to the police force. He was literally saying, I am not going to stop shooting officers until I am dead. But yet still, the police had no idea where he was. They were no closer to finding him. Or at least that was until they discovered the car, the black Lexus car that they believed Raoul Moat and the two accomplices were travelling in. The police actually appealed to the public to help them find this car, and they were even able to tell the public the license plate because on the night that PC David Rathband was shot, the car was spotted on CCTV continuously driving around the roundabout where David's patrol car was parked. So Mo and the other two men were clearly driving around the roundabout trying to see if there was in fact a police officer in that patrol car, and there was. David was in it. So anyway, the police released the details of the car and the license plate to the public, and on Tuesday the 6th of July, so day 4 of the manhunt, the car was found. A member of the public had spotted the car and she told the police that it was parked next to some industrial units in an area called Rothbury, which is a small town about 30 miles north of Newcastle. And it almost seemed like it had been abandoned. The car had been abandoned there, which meant that the group couldn't have been far. They now didn't have a vehicle with them wherever they were, so they must have been hiding somewhere either in or around Rothbury. So the searches for Raoul Moat in Rothbury began. However, the police knew that this was going to be a pretty difficult area to search because Rothbury is a remote kind of countryside place. It's basically a town that is surrounded by thousands and thousands of acres of fields and woodlands and trees, so it was a great place for them to hide. However, that same day, the same day that the car was found, the police also discovered what appeared to be a makeshift campsite. There was a tent situated in a field that was about 150 yards away from the black Lexus car, and this tent was spotted on a police helicopter that was scanning the area from above. So the police believed that this tent was being used by Raoul Moat and the two accomplices, since we know that they purchased camping gear just before Moat went on the run, and maybe they were still in this tent. Maybe that's where they were hiding in Rothbury. So armed officers began kind of getting ready to surround the tent in an attempt to just ambush the people in it and hopefully apprehend them with no casualties, with no one else getting hurt. However, as the police were just about to surround it, they noticed on the police helicopter two men come out of the tent and start walking away. So it seemed like they heard the police approaching and getting closer, and so they decided to flee the campsite. They didn't know which of the three men these two were at this point. They didn't know if it was Raoul and just one of his accomplices, or whether Raoul was somewhere else and these were the two accomplices walking to meet him somewhere. But the two men just started walking along a road in Rothbury, and so the police knew that they had to apprehend them quickly. Now was their chance. So as the two men were walking along, a couple of unmarked police cars with armed police in them just swarmed around them and blocked off their path. The police then jumped out of the cars and they threw a thunder flash at the men's feet, which is kind of like a distraction device that is used a lot in the military. They're very noisy apparently, and they emit some smoke, but they aren't dangerous. Like I said, they're just used to distract people. So they threw it at the men's feet, and then the police tackled the men to the ground and arrested them. However, as soon as the police captured them, they realised that neither of these two men were Raoul Moat. These were his two accomplices, Carl Ness and Kurum Arwan. So Moat was still hiding somewhere in Rothbury, and he was still armed with a shotgun. The police thought after they had captured Ness and Arwan that maybe Moat was still in the tent in that field. So armed officers started moving in on it, and when they had a look inside, they realised that he wasn't in there. He had fled somewhere else. But what they did find in the tent was a dictaphone, which is like a voice recorder, and they discovered that Raoul Moat had recorded something on there. He recorded himself, again talking about the shooting, saying why he did it, how he blamed the police for everything that had gone wrong in his life. I think he just repeated a lot of the same things that he had said before in his phone calls to 999 and his 49-page letter. However, it was something that he said in the middle of this whole tape that really alarmed the police. Basically, as you would expect, this entire case, this whole manhunt for Raoul Moat was huge news, national news. As I said at the start of the video, even I remember seeing this case everywhere when I was just 10 years old. It was all over the TV, all over the newspapers, on the radio. It was everywhere. You could not escape it. Everyone in Britain knew Raoul Moat's name and face. And whilst the whole manhunt was going on, the media and the press, as well as reporting on the actual case and what the current situation was, they also started reporting on Moat's personal life and his background and stuff like that. And a lot of the time, as we know, the press can falsify things or exaggerate things. And Raoul Moat felt like they were doing this to him. He kept seeing things being printed in newspapers about his personal life that he claimed were not true. They were lies, and it angered him and he was sick of it. And so on his dictaphone recording, he actually said that from now on, for every single lie that he saw about himself in the newspaper, in any newspapers, for every single lie, he was going to kill an innocent member of the public.
The next lie I see in the paper, I'm going to kill an innocent member of the public. For every lie I see in that paper, or any paper, I'm going to kill an innocent member of the public.
So before, in his letter, he said that the public did not have to fear him. He was only targeting the police. But now he was also threatening the public, so no one was safe. And everyone was terrified, especially the people that lived in Rothbury, because he was obviously hiding in Rothbury somewhere, and it seemed as though the police were no closer to finding him. So the people that lived in Rothbury were now in a lot of danger, and the threat level was so high that pretty much the entire area was put on lockdown, and the police told the local residents to stay at home if you can. Don't leave your houses because it's just way too dangerous. And the police even had to say to the press and the media, look, you have to stop reporting on this guy's personal life. You can keep reporting on what is going on with the manhunt, but you cannot say anything else about his background because the risk to the public is just way too high. And the police were even more scared because I believe by this point they had received intelligence that Raoul Moat may have been smuggled some more weapons like rifles and homemade explosives by that crime family that he used to work for years ago in Newcastle. The police were already so worried because they knew that this man had a shotgun, but now there were concerns that maybe he had even more weapons than that, so he was an even bigger threat. So following all of this, following the threats that Raoul Moat made to the public, even more armed police were drafted in. Officers from the Met Police were brought in to assist with the inquiry, and there were honestly so many officers in Rothbury at this point. They were all just on guard, constantly trying to protect members of the public and of course find Raoul Moat. But still by the Thursday the 8th of July, he had not been found. And to be honest, at this point, I think the public were getting quite frustrated with the police. They just couldn't understand why they hadn't caught him yet. But as I mentioned earlier, Rothbury and the surrounding areas was a really difficult place to search because of all of the woodlands and countryside areas around. It was so easy for him to hide within all of that, and also it was an area that Moat himself knew pretty well anyway. According to sources, he used to go fishing in Rothbury quite a bit, so he would have known where the most sheltered and secluded parts of the area were. But then finally, on Friday the 9th of July, about 6-7 days after Raoul Moat's first attack on Christopher Brown and Samantha Stubber, the police had a breakthrough. At around 7:25 p.m. that Friday evening, the police received a report from a member of the public who said that they believed they had just seen a man matching Moat's description by the banks of a river called River Coquette in Rothbury. So the armed police patrol went straight to the river. They completely surrounded it, and there they found Raoul Moat. He was lying on the grass on the ground, and he had the shotgun pointed at his head. So he was clearly planning on taking his own life. And for the next 5 to 6 hours, the police would be in a standoff with the gunman. He was just lying on the ground whilst armed officers completely surrounded him. There was nowhere left for him to run. This was a very delicate situation for the police, if that's the right word, because they obviously did not want him to kill himself. They did not want any more people to get hurt, and they wanted him to be alive when they apprehended him so that he could face justice for what he had done to Christopher, Samantha and David. And so they brought in police negotiators to try and persuade Moat to put the gun down and surrender.
Okay, listen to me, Raoul. Look, ignore them.
They also said to him that they didn't want him to come to any harm, they didn't want him to get hurt, and they were just pleading with him to put the gun down and give himself up. However, Raoul didn't, and it was clear that he was feeling very fragile and angry and exhausted at this point. I mean, he had been on the run for almost a week. He hadn't been sleeping properly, he hadn't been eating or drinking very much, so he was very run down, and he was saying to the negotiators, no one cares about me, I've got nothing to live for, I haven't even got a dad. He also said that he wasn't wasn't going to let them take him into custody because he wasn't prepared to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Meanwhile, this whole standoff was being shown on the TV. It was still national news and everyone was glued to their screens, just waiting to see what happened, how this 7-day manhunt was going to come to an end. And one really odd thing that happened during the standoff was that a famous English footballer named Paul Gascoigne actually showed up in Rothbury and he tried to speak to Raoul Moat. I believe Paul Gascoigne claimed that he knew Raoul Moat. I think he said that they used to fish together or something, which I don't actually know if that is true. But yeah, he basically turned up. He had a spare change of clothes with him. He had some chicken and bread and lager to give to Moat, and he just said to the police, if you let me speak to him, I know that I can persuade him to hand himself in. But of course the police had to say no, they couldn't let him go and speak to a man that was armed with a shotgun, obviously. So they had to tell Paul to just leave whilst the police negotiator team still tried to calm Moat down and convince him to give himself up. But to no avail, Moat was still refusing to put the gun down, and the standoff continued into the next day, into the early hours of Saturday morning. It was cold, it was rainy, it was dark, and it was a very, very tense situation for all involved. And then it got to around 1 a.m. in the morning, and the police were even more concerned for Moat's welfare at this time because his whole demeanour seemed to shift. He seemed more agitated, he seemed very fed up, and they noticed that he moved the shotgun from under his chin to the temple of his head, and they could just tell that something was going to happen any minute now, and so they needed to apprehend him fast before he pulled the trigger. And so 2 police officers fired a taser gun at Moat to try and temporarily disable him so that he could be disarmed and arrested. However, for some reason it didn't work, the tasers didn't work, and so the other officers just began shouting at Moat to put the gun down, take the gun away. But then instantly after this, a shot was fired, and for a few seconds no one knew what had happened. They didn't know if Moat had shot at himself, they didn't know if he had shot at the police. All they heard was the gunshot, but soon the armed officers realised that the bullet had been fired at the gunman. Raoul Moat had shot himself in the head. He knew that this was it for him. He knew that if he gave himself up, he would be spending the rest of his life in prison, and he would not let that happen. So he decided to end it all, end his life. Immediately after Moat shot himself in the head, an ambulance and paramedics were rushed to the scene, and they took the critically injured Moat to the hospital. However, there was nothing doctors could do. He couldn't be saved, and he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. 7 days after the first shooting and 6 hours into the standoff, one of the biggest manhunts in British history had come to an end, and Raoul Moat was never brought to justice for what he did, for the murder of Christopher Brown and the brutal attacks, the attempted murders of Samantha Stubber and PC David Rathband. However, the police could now focus on the 2 men that aided Raoul Moat during his time on the run, Carl Ness and Kurum Arwan. About 8 months after Moat's death in March of 2011, both men stood trial for a variety of different charges, and they were both found guilty. Both men were convicted of conspiracy to murder, attempted murder, and also the robbery of a fish and chip shop, which was something that all 3 men, including Raoul Moat, did during that week. They robbed a fish and chip shop to obviously get some money, but also food, I think, because they were hiding out, so they hadn't eaten much. So both men were found guilty of all 3 of those charges, and on top of that, Carl Ness was convicted of possession of a firearm with intent to endanger life and also murder. Carl Ness was convicted of the murder of Christopher Brown. The police and the prosecution felt that even though Carl Ness wasn't the one who pulled the trigger that night, Raoul Moat was the one that physically shot Christopher Brown, they still felt that Moat would not have been able to do that were it not for Carl Ness, because Carl Ness was the one that stalked Samantha and her new boyfriend Christopher whilst Moat was in prison. He helped Moat plan the whole murder. He drove Moat to the house where the murder happened, and he sourced the shotgun for Moat. If it weren't for Carl Ness, Moat probably wouldn't have been able to do what he did, and so they charged him with murder because he was also responsible for Christopher's death, and the jury agreed and they found him guilty. For his part in this whole case, Carl Ness was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 40 years. Khurram Alwan was also given a life sentence, but his minimum tariff was 20 years. So even though Moat himself could never be convicted for anything, at least the victims and the victims' families received some justice after the convictions of Moat's two accomplices, because, as I said, Moat would not have been able to do what he did without them, especially Carl Ness. Speaking of the victims in this case, I thought I would just talk through what happened with them and their families in the aftermath of this crime, starting with 29-year-old Christopher Brown, the only murder victim in this whole case, and who a lot of people, including his own family, believe is also the forgotten victim. As I've said throughout this video, this case received a massive amount of media attention. It was all over the news constantly, and a lot of the coverage was literally just about Raoul Moat, and occasionally it would also be about his relationship with his ex, Samantha. And obviously that is kind of understandable because Moat was the one on the run, and the police did need his face out there so that the public knew who to look out for. But it was almost like the media and the press seemed to forget Christopher, the one who actually lost his life. There was hardly any coverage on him and his murder and what he was like as a person. No one was talking about him. The whole time it was all about Raoul Moat, the murderer. It wasn't about the victim. Even after it was all over, after Moat was dead, still the majority of the coverage was about him. And as I'm sure you can imagine, this really hurt Christopher's family. He had just been killed in such a brutal and horrific way, and it was like people just forgot that. They forgot about him, which is so heartbreaking. As for Samantha Stubber, as I touched on earlier, she did thankfully survive the attack, although she still has the scars from where she was shot and where she had to be operated on. But she did recover physically anyway. I'm sure the abuse from Moat and the shooting must have had a huge impact on her mental health. But according to a documentary that I watched about this case, she is doing well now, and she has rebuilt her life with her family around her. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the third victim, PC David Rathband, did also survive the attack, which was honestly a miracle. I think everyone at the time expected him to be the second murder victim in this case because he was shot twice, once in the face, and he was in a very critical condition when he was taken to the hospital. But he pulled through, he did survive. However, he was left completely blind in both eyes, and he did have a long battle with his health ahead of him. And whilst he was recovering from his injuries, David and his brother actually set up an organisation called the Blue Lamp Foundation, which is a charity that was set up to help those that work in the emergency services and have been injured whilst on duty, just like David was. The charity basically just helps the injured individual by offering them whatever support they need and providing them with financial aid until they hopefully recover and get back on their feet. It's an incredible charity for the emergency services, and the work that David did after what he went through was honestly inspirational. Everyone just thought that he was such a brave man, and he even received a Pride of Britain award in November of 2010, just 4 months after he was shot. And in June of 2012, he was actually due to carry the Olympic torch in the 2012 London Olympic Games. On the outside, David seemed to be doing really well. He appeared to be adapting well to his life with the loss of his eyesight. He was raising lots of money for his charity. He was the nation's hero. However, behind closed doors, David was struggling massively with his mental health and with the trauma of what happened to him. And in February of 2012, PC David Rathband took his own life and he passed away at his home where he was later found. The majority of people believe that he would still be alive today if Raoul Moat hadn't done what he did to him, because David was happy for the most part. He had a job in the police force that he absolutely adored and was so passionate about, but it all got taken away from him. So really, even though technically there was only one murder victim in this case, many strongly believe that Raoul Moat was also responsible for David's death too. However, a very sick twist in this case is that after Moat shot himself and died, a couple of pages started popping up on social media sites such as Facebook, and these pages were basically made by people who thought that Raoul Moat was some kind of hero. These pages literally praised him for what he did. There were posts that read, quote, "Rest in peace, Raoul Moat. You died an absolute legend. Hope you laugh at how much you humiliated the police, bro," which is just insane. This was a man that had destroyed the lives of so many people. He killed one person and severely injured two more, and yet there were people making him out to be this fearless champion that defeated the horrible police. I think it's one thing to feel some level of sympathy for Moat and the fact that he didn't get the help that he needed because he was very clearly mentally ill. And apparently, according to some sources, he did ask for it. He asked for some psychiatric help before the shooting spree, but obviously he didn't get it. And of course, I think we can all feel sympathy for his family and friends, because despite what he did, they also lost someone in this case. But to call him a hero is just disgusting, and I can't imagine how hurtful that must have been to the families, to Christopher's family especially. Imagine you being a family member of a murder victim and then going on social media and seeing pages where people are calling your family member's murderer a legend. It's vile, it's so vile. But thankfully, I believe those social media pages were all quickly taken down, thank God. But anyway, that is it for this case. That is the story of one of the biggest manhunts in British history, the manhunt for Raoul Moat. I'm going to leave a link to the Blue Lamp Foundation website in the description box if you want to learn more about them and what they do. They do accept donations to help fund their work, so I will also leave a link to their donation page in the description box. If you are able to donate to the charity, even if it's just a couple of pounds, I'm sure that will still mean so much and make a huge difference and be a lovely tribute to David. But yeah, that is it for this case. As always, I hope I did the case justice. I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Please do give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you again next week for another mystery with Molly. Bye guys!